Hi. Okay. Hi, everyone. So we're just going to go through an introductory workshop for Velociraptor, and we're going to go through today installing it, setting it up, and playing around in the UI, and just trying to get a bit of a feel to the UI. And then tomorrow we'll go into more details, about like how to use it in a real incident and these kind of things, and more details and explore more of the features. But today we're just going to go through the basic introduction to the tool and the UI. So I've got the presentation workshop here, present.velocidex.com, and this is going to be the Auscert 2023 presentation. Let's just dive right in. Okay. So what is Velociraptor? Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to really focus on Windows system, and Velociraptor has, a Mac OS and Linux, and even FreeBSD clients, but we're not going to focus on them today. But we're really going to just do it with a Windows system. What we're going to need is we're going to just use our own VM, so we're not really kind of deploying it for real in the cloud. We're just going to deploy it locally just to sort of get a feel of it. And the other thing is that there's really too much content to cover, in a small session. So we're not going to cover everything about Velociraptor or even most things about Velociraptor, but just an introductory level. Okay, so we're going to use the Windows VM, so that would be required. And I have a Windows VM built here, which is a clean VM. So what is Velociraptor? So the thing that's special about Velociraptor, it's a DFIR tool, digital forensic incident response tool. So the unique thing about it is that it has something called a Velociraptor query language. And we're going to look at that a little bit later on and see what that means and why we would want to use it. But the most interesting thing about it is that VQL is really central to everything about Velociraptor. And we're going to see how we can write custom queries with VQL to identify and hunt for threats. And then the other cool thing about Velociraptor is that we can hunt for artifacts at scale. So we can do we can do very quick searches across a large number of artifacts and zero in on anomalies, in a short time. So let's just have a look at what does it look like, at a high level overview. And generally, we would deploy the Velociraptor server in the cloud. Today, we're going to do it locally, but generally, we would do it in the cloud. And we have an admin UI, which is a GUI that we use to manipulate the server. And also, the clients, what we call clients, are the assets. So there will be like the laptops, the servers, and other assets that are constantly talking to the server, and the server can, task them with collections and collect data from them and, monitor them and these kind of things. So the interesting thing is that we have persistent communication. So that means that as soon as you task the endpoint, it immediately returns results. So we are able to query the endpoint and get results back very quickly, immediately. So we don't need to wait for polling or anything like that. All right. So as I mentioned before, Linux, Windows, Mac OS, FreeBSD. The interesting thing about the architecture is that the server is just a collection. You can think of Velociraptor as just a collection tool rather than anything more complex than that. And because it just limits itself to collection, then it can be very fast, because all it does is just collect the data and store it. It doesn't really need to do a lot of calculations or analysis on the server. So most of the analysis is done by the queries on the endpoint. So we don't need to. So we don't. The server doesn't need to do very much, and then that allows it to be faster. Okay, so it's really scalable compared to other tools in the marketplace. We recommend about 15 to 10,000 clients on each server. Probably, 20, 25, I've had people tell me they're running 60,000, 80,000. I mean, it's just a guide. But, I guess, at the moment, the recommendation is around this level. And, if you can do SSL offloading, then it can go a bit higher because it removes a lot of the load on the server. And this is, people always ask us the size of the provisions, and we usually recommend something like 8 gigs of RAM. Maybe 2 to 4, 8 cores is a lot, but maybe 2 to 4 cores is usually fine. And we normally run on a Debian server, so it's not like what we do today, which will be running on Windows, but we normally run on a normal cloud server. And we can go for like the largest deployment that I know of is about 150,000 endpoints with the multi-front-end setup. So it's possible. All right, so what we're going to do is do a bit more hands-on and jump straight in. And what we're going to do is create a local server. So we're not going to go through the proper deployment to the cloud like that you would do in reality. For this exercise, we're just going to kind of run it locally. So Velociraptor has kind of a very useful feature called the GUI command, which just brings up the GUI with a locally created server running on your own machine. So let's jump onto the GitHub and download the Velociraptor. So we just search for Velociraptor GitHub, go to our GitHub location, which is just here, and go to our releases page, click releases, and here are all the releases. And the way it works is these are all the what they call the assets, or the binaries for the different operating systems. The .sig are just signatures for GPG verification. But we have Darwin, ARM, which is the M1 chip. We have AMD 64 and so on. In this case, we're on Windows, so we're going to choose Windows AMD 64. So we're going to choose this guy, and we just download it. So here it should come here like this, and that should put it in the downloads directory. So what we're going to do is open a command shell, cmd. And in this case, I'm an administrator, but you should be an administrator. Right-click, run as administrator, if you're not. So here we are in the downloads folder, and we've got our Velociraptor downloaded. So what I'm going to actually do is in this workshop, I'm going to use the pre-release for 069, which is not released yet. So it's not up on the release page, but it will be next week. So this is the 069 version. But you will do the same thing with the 068. And then all you have to do is just run this Velociraptor, and then just run GUI command. So Velociraptor GUI, that's really all it is. And when you press enter, you'll see it will start up. And the first thing that it would say is, let's wait for it. Here we go. All right, and you can see, like, I'll just scroll up to show you. Hold on a minute. Scroll up. Okay, so you'll see that it starts off with, the version, the build, and then it tells us all about messages about, initializing, starting. And the reason we're seeing this is because of the GUI command just shows us all these debugging messages. All right, and then what it will do is, as you can see, it's opening a browser to this port. And then by default, it uses a self-signed SSL certificate. So we have to click through the warning, and there it is. So what it did is it created a new installation and provisioned it just locally, and it's listening on a local port, the local host or the local port, and it has like a preset username and password and of admin password, that it opens the browser to that. So just so we can interact with it locally. So this is not for production use, it's just for testing type, demonstration type thing. All right, so that's great. So this is all we had to do. And I've got a screenshot here just to show you like what it does. And then there we go. Right, so that's our welcome screen. We can see the GUI. So now let's just go through the GUI and work out what's what. So the first thing that we'll look at is the dashboard. So to get to the dashboard is just like the home page here. And that would be the main dashboard, right? So we've got here just a quick graph here of the memory utilization of the server and CPU and so on, and how many clients are connected. And by default, when we go and use the GUI command, it makes one client. that connects to, it actually creates two orgs. We'll go into that in a minute, but it creates one client that talks to one server so that we can have something to talk with, right? So we can just, use it normally and understand like how it works. So that's what we will see. You can also customize it and so on. So we can see the dashboard like this, and the next thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is the user settings, which is the next important part of the UI, is up here, the user settings. And here I've got the username, which I'm logging in as admin, and I can log out and so on. And depending on, the authentication, it might have avatars and things like that. But we're going to just select the user settings, and this is configuring this user's, experience. And you have all kinds of, settings that you can change. You can change the themes, dark theme, light theme. I think there's a pink theme, whatever, right? So there's different colors. I'm just going to keep it boring with the normal standard. This is the default theme. And then we can, over here, we can change orgs. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We can change languages, German, English, these kind of things. And this is important, display time zone. When you're working a case, you need to know the time zone of the different times. And sometimes by default, it's UTC, because, all the time zones are managed internally by UTC. But if you're working a case, in Sydney, Canberra, then it's useful to, to just kind of switch to Sydney time zone. And this only changes the UI, like what you see, but it's easy to see then the dates, right? So I mean, we could do that. All right, so that's the user settings. Okay. Now let's look at an individual client. How do we investigate it? So the first thing that we will do is we need to find a client to investigate, right? So I'm just going to go over here and show you the search bar up here. And that's your entry point to searching for clients. And you can imagine you can have thousands of clients all connected to this one server, right? And so you probably can't, pay. I mean, you can sort of page through them. You can click this or show all, and you'll see like all the clients. You'll have thousands of them, right? And you can page through it and so on. But that's not very efficient. You're not going to be able to find clients very easily that way because there's too many. So the best way is to search. So for instance, if I search for the host name, I'll start typing it and it will show up. This host name is Win12H, whatever. So that's because it's a random host name. It's just a VM, but you would have like a normal host name now. So you can search by host name, and that's how you can find something. Or you can actually also have labels. So in this case, I can select one or more clients, hosts, and click the label button here. And then I can select the label. I can label them. And a label, if you like to think of it, is just a way of grouping together clients that are, fairly similar. So the new label, like we'll call it, Mike's machine. So we'll call it Mike. And you'll see that it adds this label to Mike. If I click on it, it will clear the label, but we just keep it as that. So now I can actually search for machines by label. So label, Mike. So it tells me these are the Mike labels, and I can find them that way. So this is it's a really good way. We'll learn later, that you can use labels for many more things, but it's just a way of grouping together clients. So that's great. So we talked about searching. You can also search for a number of other things by MAC address, by IP address, labels we mentioned, and so on. Once you find your host that you're interested in, so here I'm interested in this host. It's the only one really. Just click the client ID button here. And that takes me to the host overview screen. Right, so over here, if you look at the sidebar, there's different sections to the UI, and this is the host information section. It just tells me information about this host. So internally, hosts have what's called client ID. So it's a random number it starts with C, right? But that is a client ID. Now, the thing about a client ID is that it's unique across the whole system, and because host names are not really unique, right? You can assign different host names. Host names can change. If you have DHCP server, it will change. So host name is not really the identifier that we use. We use these client IDs, which are, sort of more permanent. Okay, so in the host overview page, I'm just going to go through, these buttons and show you which, what you can do with these hosts. So the first thing that we can see information about it, just generic information, like when it was built, when it was seen, and so on, IP address, all the labels, what kind of OS it is. Over here, we can, assign keys and values, metadata to the host, but I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here. And then if we look at the VQL drill down, so that was the overview. VQL drill down, we get more information about it. And in particular, we can see telemetry about the host in terms of how much CPU use and how much memory use we've been using on that endpoint, forever. Every 10 seconds, we sample it. And this is important because when people say to us, oh, your agent is using up a lot of resources, whatever, then we can go back to this and say, okay, it's really been using 1.8% of CPU and 97 megs of memory. So we can give exact numbers of what impact that we are making on the endpoint. It's really important. And then we have like more information about work group, work name. This is Windows specific information. And here we have all the users on this machine, right? Okay, so let's, so this machine only has administrator user on it. That's it. All right, so let's just go over the slides and see. So we've talked about that. And now we can do shell. So sometimes when we do DFIR, it's important to have the ability to run arbitrary shell commands on the endpoint. We try not to do it because it's difficult to ensure that we're not going to be able to like delete all the files or whatever, right? So we don't really encourage this too much, but it's useful to have there just in case. So in this slide deck, we can see that get local group members, group administrator. So that's the command that I'm going to run to figure out. So this is a PowerShell local group members dash group administrators. So that is the command that is a PowerShell command just to demonstrate to enumerate all the members of the local administrator group to see whether sometimes attackers would add a new user to that, and it will be a way of them logging in to get admin level privileges. So when I launch this with the PowerShell on this machine, then it goes off and runs the thing, and and then it's going to run it. And oh, maybe I messed it up. Local group members. I think it's like maybe like that. Administrators. Yeah, so it's going to go off, connect to the thing, run the PowerShell, and let's have a look what's happening. Was there an error? There was an error. Get local group members. The term get. Oh, I should paste it. Get local group member, not members. Okay, sorry. Go and do that again. And you see, this is the problem. This is actually, it wasn't intentional, but that's the problem. What we don't encourage just running arbitrary commands because you can get them wrong. You can mess it up. And you can cause damage. So that's why we actually have preset artifacts for these things, so we don't have to type anything in. But anyway, okay, off it goes, and here it is. So it works. So it gives us, the output. This is just a PowerShell command that we run. So it's useful to be able to just run arbitrary PowerShell when you need to. Okay, so that was us running arbitrary commands on the endpoint. Next, we're going to talk about something called the VFS View, which is just a server-side case. So we want to look at files on the endpoint. So before we could run some arbitrary commands, but we want to actually look at the file system and inspect files. So over here we have so this is called the VFS, the virtual file system. And what the virtual file system is, it's a cache on the server of files that we know about in the client. So the server kind of collects information about the client files. So as a user, you can interact with this information, but you're not actually always, it's not the same as like mounting it over, Windows Explorer and then looking at the files. The endpoint doesn't need to be online to look at the VFS. It's just us visualizing the information we know about it. So if we click the VFS button up here, so in it's just going to go to virtual file system section here. So this is the information we know about the client already. And at the moment, because it's a new client, it's just started, we don't know very much about it. So we actually don't have any data. So it says no data available, right? So, and then these things, they're called accesses. We're gonna look at them a little bit later, but it's basically listing the information based off. Oh, there's a question. What context is used to run these arbitrary commands? So it's running a system, right? Because it's installed the system. So it will run those as system. It's a good question. All right. At the moment, we don't know anything about this directory. So auto is the automatic file system accessor. So it will use OS APIs or NTFS parsing or whatever to get the data. So that's the most normal way to access, or the most, the default. And when we do that, so you can see that the top level is going to have the C drive, right? And we can basically kind of go through the hierarchy, right? C drive, and then users. Yeah. And each time we click that button, it's syncing the directory. Or we can do this recursively, sync the directory, and you'll see that will refresh all the files under the users directory, so we don't have to, so it syncs the view of the files on the endpoints with the server. So then when we navigate the UI, then we can see the files that we know about. So so that's an example. And now if you look at this, and then we can look at individual files, right? So in this case, we know about this file, and we know like metadata about it, how big it is, dates, times, these kind of things, but we don't have the actual file, the data. So we can click collect from the client. So we click on this, and you'll see that it will start to collect, and then immediately, if the machine's online, it's online now, but it could be offline. If it's offline, then it will schedule that collection. But if it's online, it will collect it and immediately bring it back. And then we'll see a little like floppy disk icon here, which says that we have that data. So that means that the server has the data. So when the server has the data, you can see that we can see a preview of the data. So it's got a header, SQLite, because this particular file is an SQLite file. We can click on this thing, and it will show us like a hex view of it. We can page through it. It's just a hex view, right? And I think the file's empty. You can get one with, that one is probably empty. It's just a random file. We can pick up another file. I don't know what that is. What's in there? Yeah, see, so it has something in there. So that was a very tiny file as well. But with the regex, we can search through it. So like D0, BC, we can search through it and page through it and all these things. So that's how we preview the file. So that's just preview, but we can see the hashes and things like that. We can also grab it as well because we downloaded it. So this is great. So we basically have the ability to go and download a bunch of files using the VFS, and that's kind of like the most people are familiar with this kind of interface, where we can just go and look at files and like a Windows Explorer type thing. Oops. Yeah, click on that. Yeah, so it's not it's a familiar and easy interface to use. Most people feel good with it. There's a JSON file here, whatever. Yeah. So all right. So let's go on to this. All right. So we can filter the tables as well, and this is true of any like, say for example, we have the Windows directory. It's typically a pretty large directory. It has a lot of files in it. So and then somewhere in there you see there's like 97 pages. We can page through it, that kind of thing. But we probably it's going to take a long time, and let's say we want to find Notepad in this Windows directory, so we can filter Notepad. Oops, Notepad. right? So that just finds it straight away. So it allows us to filter, but we can filter on any column as well. It's sort, and this is the sort button as well. So it doesn't really matter, but it's actually a common table UI view that you can filter any table that way. Okay, so we talked about that, talked about refreshing the directory, we talked about fetching from the client, and this NTFS. So NTFS, so we were looking at this auto accessor, which uses the file system APIs, but you can also use something called NTFS, the FTFS accessor, and it's the same thing, and we'll use an NTFS parser to look at the, you see that this is the device name, so C drive, and it actually like parses the NTFS file system of that device. So most of the time it will give us the same files, except for when we want to look at these kind of special NTFS files, like the MFT and things like that. You can also just kind of like do this, like the MFT here, and you know that is an internal file that stores all the metadata about NTFS. So you can only really get to it with the NTFS parser. So yeah, so that's that. Navigating the interface, like we talked about that, and we've talked about the preview, and we've shown the previewing the files feature. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is show you the multi-tenancy and RBAC, so role-based access control. So you've seen that we can fetch any file from the endpoint, and it's kind of worrying, right? Because you can get, you know, sensitive data, and you know, getting access to these highly privileged files is a big deal, right? Like, so we want to make sure that we can secure the server so that only the authorized users can access it, or you know, in an investigation and so on. So Velociraptor has a feature called multi-org, which is a multi-tenant type feature. And what it means is that you can actually create one server, and then you can have multiple separate organizations that use the same server. And an organization, what we call an organization, or sometimes called a tenant, is just a way of dividing clients into visibility spheres, I would say, like basically areas that we can see. So each org contains a bunch of clients, right? And then the clients cannot really be mixed between them. And the users are actually assigned into orgs, and they can't really be mixed between them, right? So, and so it is actually kept completely separate, but we're just using the same server to serve all of these things. It's really good for when you have very small deployments and you don't want to stand up another cloud asset. And you know, it's kind of useful because custom artifacts can be maintained between orgs. And the different orgs clients, they can't really connect to other orgs, so they're separated at the network level as well. All right, so let me show you how you can use it. And so if we go up to our welcome screen and we look at our user preferences, and I mentioned it before, you can switch between orgs. So when we run Velociraptor GUI, it creates 2 orgs by default, just so that we can see, you know, the feature. So I'm going to switch to this. So we have the root org, which is the default. So if you don't want to use multi-tenant, you're going to get a root org and everything will be fine, just works. But if you want to create another org, that's what we're talking about. We can switch to a different org. So here we're going to switch to this new other org called Acme Inc. And what it does is immediately we'll see that we are the user admin, right? But then we are inside of this org, Acme Inc. So we are in an org right now, but otherwise it looks exactly the same. The dashboard just shows us all the clients in that org, right? So it doesn't really care about the clients, you know, on the other orgs. So we're only seeing things in that org. It's all very separated. So now when we are searching for, now see the machine that I labeled before is not even here, right? Because it's not even part of this org. So it doesn't exist. So there is this other machine here that is part of this org, right? And we can see the client ID of that machine has the org ID attached to it. So we know it belongs in that org, right? So Okay, so it's a completely different machine, different things, and we cannot really mix clients between orgs. I mean, in this case, because it's running on the same like physical host, so it's the same real machine, right? But it's just another instance. And then we can do the same thing. We can collect things, and and of course the VFS that we were in, it's empty still because we haven't interacted with that client yet at all, right? So it's completely empty. All right, so we can switch the orgs. Okay, so how do you create one of those orgs? I mentioned that initially it created the org. So we're going to do an exercise where we can create the org. What we want to do is we can use BQL to create orgs. So we go to server artifacts here, server artifacts, and create a new collection. And we're going to search for new org. And here, this is an artifact. We're going to talk about artifacts in a few minutes, but it basically is a query for us to create an org. So we're going to create a new org, configure the parameters, switch to the next one, and give the org a name, right? So let's say we're going to call it Auscert. It's going to be a new org called Auscert, right? And so when we run this, it's going to go off and it's going to create a new org. And let me have a look. Oh, I actually can only do it from the root org. Let me just switch orgs first because I don't have permission in this org. Do that thing again. New org. New org, and we're going to call it Auscert. Yeah. All right, so it's going to go off, create a new org, and we can see that it gave it a new org ID. So it's a new number just for these orgs. It's a random number. Starts with an O, so we know it's an org ID. And it's created an initial administrator user on it called admin. That's the initial user. So that's how you create a new org. And now if I switch, okay, I should be able to switch to this new org, if I wanted to, right? So this is basically how we do like multi-tenanted deployments. So create a new org. So let's say that we wanted to deploy a new org, and this is useful for when you have a new case that you want to deploy, a new deployment for it, and they're not really big enough to warrant a whole, like maybe it's only 50 endpoints or 100 endpoints. It's not really enough to deploy like a whole infrastructure for it. So it's just super quick. You just create an org and then do the investigation. We're going to go through that. So creating the new org. So that's great. And then we want to create a user. So we'll talk about users in the Velociraptor GUI. So at the moment, you see that I'm the user admin, right? So admin is an administrator user, so I can create other users. So I'm going to go to the user management screen here. And here I'm going to see all the different users in this installation. So I'm going to create another user for Mike, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to create a new user, right? Mike is going to be my new user. So because I'm admin, I can create users. So here we go. Created a new user called Mike. So Mike can't really log in because it doesn't have a password. So when I create a new user, I can't really log in as Mike because I haven't set a password. So the next thing I'm going to do is set the password here. Click on this little button here, and it allows the admin to set a password for someone else. So I'm gonna set my password, test. Okay, and now Mike has a password. Great, but Mike still doesn't have any permissions. If I look at the root org, the user Mike by default, when we create a new user, it only has read-only user on that org. So users have permissions in orgs. So this user Mike only has read-only user in the org, in the root org. Okay. So now let's say that I want Mike to have administrator level access in the new Auscert org. So I'm going to add the user to the new org. First of all, click on the user, add user to orgs. Oh, it doesn't have admin. Maybe it's this. Give them admin level. I don't know what's going on here. Add user to org. Add user to this org. Okay. Let's see the. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's right. So I didn't have. Okay. So I'm going to add the user to the org. So I need to create, I'm the administrator. I need to create myself, to add myself as administrator for these other orgs as well, right? So I can assign users to them. So I've got to add myself to organization admin. So now this admin is going to be org admin as well here. So we can manage orgs. Okay, so we're going to add ourselves to the org, and we're going to say Auscert, right? So Mike is going to be added to the Auscert org, and by default, he's a read-only user, so he can't change anything, but can see stuff. And this is, and I can, assign them a server administrator if I wanted to. Now down here, you see all the permissions that are allowed, and when it's a reader, they only have the read permission. But if I wanted them to be able to start a hunt as well, then I can just assign a special permission. So this is what a role is, just a group of permissions, and we can assign them extra permissions as well that are outside of the role. So they don't. So it's kind of flexible. It's just a bundle of permissions, right? So Mike is now logging in, can only log on to Auscert, and he's a read-only user with hunting privileges. So let's try this. We log out. Mike. Yes. We log in with our password that I set, and I've logged in. And I can now switch to the Auscert thing. And I should be able to see. I can only really start hunts now, right? So I mean, it's kind of a weird permission to give, because normally read-only users we wouldn't, give that. But just an example. Okay, so let's go back to admin. So anyway, this is just kind of like how you can use that to UI to manage all the different, roles and permissions. And it just gives you an idea of the kind of ACLs that are, there's a question. Given you support SSO, but do not validate accounts to providers, does this mean that you also do not support auto user provisioning? So auto user provisioning is a good question. So when we have SSO, the SSO provider tells us that this user authenticated. So they take care of the authentication thing. But what I'm showing you now is the authorization piece. So just because you authenticated to Google, you have your Gmail address, right? That doesn't mean that you have any rights on any orgs at all, right? It doesn't mean that. You can log in, and then as soon as you log in, Velociraptor is going to go, you don't have any right in this org, and log you out, right? So that is a separate concept from authorization. You can now configure users to have a base permission based on providers. No, you have to add them specifically, right? So you can't just say, so this is one thing that's like specifically a design decision. Like we didn't want to say, okay, you're going to use SSO, and then anyone that the SSO provider says is authenticated, boom, you get administrator. So we don't really have that. So since I can control the access on my IDP for specific users to access it, so you can control the access, so specific users can access it, but you can't assign them roles based on the SSO provider. So you still have to go and add them in here, but you can add them programmatically, so you can sort of patch it together. Is there plans to integrate authentication with Active Directory rather than having to create specific local accounts? So this is what I'm saying. So it is, the authentication is integrated, right? So we asked the IDP provider, did this user authenticate? But that doesn't give you a role in Velociraptor, and we don't want to do that. So you need to specifically add a role. You can do it programmatically, but not automatically, and not out of the box. So just because, like, you can imagine, like, we can just connect it to LDAP, right? And add it to the all domain admins, and suddenly every domain admin has, Velociraptor admin. That is terrible. We can't have that, right? So will it create an empty record for the user if the user authenticates and has no roles? I think it will create a record, as in, like, it will store its preferences or whatever, but you can't really log in, so it probably doesn't. I mean, I don't think it matters, right? Because the user can't really, it will be logged out immediately. I don't have an SSO installation here in this demo, but what will happen is that the user will log in and then they'll just get, like, kicked out immediately. There may be a GUI record created of them, but I'm not sure. It will literally kick them out because they don't have any ACLs, because that has to be added deliberately. Now, you can do things like automatically provision, whatever, but will I see the login under my user space so I can assign them later? Or do I need to create them in Velociraptor first and ask them to log in? That is a good question. That is a good question. I don't think you'll be able to see them, no. And the reason why is because you would have to, because then you would, like, literally, if you have an SSO like Gmail that's exposed to the internet, and then people just, like, random people will try and log in, and you'll just get, like, random usernames showing up here with no access. So no, I don't think that will work. See, in here, if you want to delete a user, like if I wanted to delete this mic user, then I just take off all the permissions, and then they're literally deleted, right? And that deletes the user. So if the user has no permissions, they don't really exist, right? So so you can't really do that. From an auditing perspective, will I have access to that anyway? Yes, so that's right. So that's the next slide. So you can go to the server audit log, and if you look at, actually it's in the root log. Let's switch to the root log first. This is the server audit log, and you can see all kinds of auditable events here. This is a timeline, so you can switch, to different times. And what we're seeing here is the timeline. And you will also see a login failure here. That would be an auditable event. When the user authenticated to SSO, then they try login, but they had no permission, they will get kicked out, and you'll see an auditable event here. So you can see that here, but they won't create, they won't have an empty record that you can go in the UI and add them. I think that would be a bad idea, because you'll just end up with a lot of crap in there. It's just random people from the internet logging in, and that won't be good. But you'll probably be able to, but you will be able to see the username that they tried to log in as, and then just go and add them, right? So that's fine. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. Cool. What have we got here? So yeah, so we've got the different roles. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we add a user, we assign the user to the org, and roles and permissions we can change here. And okay, so the next thing that we do, so now we created the org, we need to create clients that are logging into that. So as I said, clients are assigned to specific orgs. So what we want to do is we want to build an MSI so that we can deploy it, right? So usually on Windows, we use MSI as the packaging format. So what we're going to do is click server artifacts, and we want to build an MSI. So if we want to build an MSI to connect to our specific org, let's say we go to the Auscert org, for example, and we're going to build an MSI that connects to that org, to the Auscert org. So we're going to go to server artifacts. We're going to click a new collection and search for an MSI and create MSI, right? So this artifact builds us an MSI for, and what it does is takes the configuration that's required and packs it into the MSI. So now it's ready to go and connect to the specific org, to this org, the Auscert org. So yeah, so basically we click launch and it goes off and builds the thing. And it's going to download the MSI package from the internet. And then it's going to embed the config into it, the required config. So to tell it, you know, with all the keys and all this kind of stuff, right? So it can talk to our server with the right crypto and all this. And then in here, it creates an MSI file. And it's telling us this is for the org Auscert. So it's going to connect to this org. So remember that I mentioned before, it can't really connect to the other orgs. It can only just connect to that org, right? So then, you know, then we just like download it and install it. It's just an MSI, and you know, we just deploy it using, you know, SCCM or whatever, like just normal things. Yeah, so that becomes so you can just deploy that, and that's how you would deploy your MSIs with targeting them to specific orgs. So we talked about that, and then we fetch it, and then I've got to have a hard stop now. All right, cool. So and then this is the audit log. We mentioned that, and you know, we can see who scheduled flows and basically all auditable events. Okay, so this is actually a good spot to stop. So this is just kind of like we install it, we deploy the different orgs, and you know, you can play with it now. And we started to look at the VFS. We looked at how to grab files. We looked at how to you know, inspect files, download them, and all. So it's already useful as it is. But we're gonna go into more depth next session. I'm gonna stop the recording.